Think about how vast the universe is. Think about all the wonders that it possesses and the incredible mysteries it must hide. And in that universe, there's a tiny pinpoint. And if one had the ability to comprehend sound, one would surely stop and take a listen. That pinpoint is a little blue planet. And on that planet, a phenomenon so spectacular, news must have circulated quickly throughout all the cosmos. What phenomenon? You know. I know you know. Rock and roll. It was this incredible thing that I was blessed to have witnessed since the day I was born in 1967. As far back as I can remember, I was glued to the radio. I was always so fascinated by what came out of that thing. When I was little, the Beatles and the Beach Boys were playing constantly. Even the 50s stuff was playing. Words like the Rolling Stones and Elvis and the Mamas and the Papas, Elton John, the Bee Gees and Frank Sinatra were part of my vocabulary. When songs came on the radio, it seemed like something important was happening. The stories they told were enthralling. The songwriting and performing, pure genius. What I didn't know, what I could not even imagine, was that it would all but end. It was the age of sound, a renaissance of music that started roughly in 1954 and went to about the year 2000. I know the time frame is subjective and open to opinions, but I'm an expert. After 2000, there was a noticeable decline. Music that measured up to the age became more and more rare, and today it is almost impossible to find. It has not gone extinct, however. It lingers here and there. Those who understand know that rock and roll will never die. It's only now, as I look back, that I truly comprehend how brilliant the age of sound really was. And I got to be there. I was in second grade. After school, I would find myself sitting under a little tree outside our modest apartment in Huntington Beach, California. In my hands was a little radio. I must have gotten it as a birthday present or something. It was my most prized possession. I began a habit that has lasted till this very day. I kept the radio under my pillow, and every night, after I was tucked in and my mom told me to go to sleep, I would wait a few minutes and quietly turn it on. I'd spend a good hour with it every night. As time went on, I became a rabid enthusiast of the top 20 countdown. By the time I reached 5th grade, it was a well-established ritual. The music was everywhere. In 4th grade, I remember hearing ELO, Living Thing, on the car radio as my grandmother was driving me home from school. I remember looking at her, puzzled, and asking, "What? What's a terrible thing to lose?" She looked at me for a second and said, "Love. Love is a terrible thing to lose." I didn't really understand that, but I knew it meant something. Everyone had a stereo and a record collection. I remember my mom rocking out to Elvis's Aloha record one Saturday morning in 3rd grade. I woke up to the intro. You know, the Space Odyssey theme. She had it cranked. It was so epic, like some fantastic event was taking place. I got up and walked to the living room just as CC Rider started rolling. She was vacuuming and dancing at the same time. I mean, she was really rocking it out. I'll never forget it. To this day, I love to listen to that album. We had a collection of 45s. Me and my little brother would stack a bunch on the turntable and crank 'em out. We'd march round and round the coffee table, jamming to Dick Dale's Miserlou or C.C. McCall's Convoy. Music was fun, and as kids, we got it. In 5th grade, I used to go to my friend Teddy's house after school. The first thing we'd do is put on ELO, Out of the Blue. We'd listen to the whole thing, like every day. And then we'd put on some Yellow Brick Road and some Beatles and I don't know, whatever else, you know. In 4th grade, I was a latchkey kid, and the first thing I did when I got home was go to our stereo console. You know, the big ones that were actually pieces of furniture. I'd put on Ferrante and Teicher. I would sit there in absolute amazement at the seemingly endless possibilities of musical composition. I was just this little kid, and I'm listening to this stuff. And I could just picture the music in my mind and the way it moved around and all the major and minor chords. I didn't know what that was, but I could hear the differences and the subtleties, and it just built these images in my mind that were so vivid, and I kind of could see what was going on with the music. I didn't know it at the time, but my musical vocabulary was being established. Then there was this time we went to Universal Studios, and I saw this band playing on a flatbed trailer. I recognized the song, and we went over to watch. The song was Love is Like Oxygen. I'd heard it on the radio. Now I was seeing the band who played it. Sweet. You know, the band, Sweet. I looked upon those guys, those rock stars, absolutely mesmerized, and thought, that's what I want to do when I grow up. And I did. Sorta. I remember the night of my first day of 5th grade. I was all tucked into bed. We had bunk beds. I got the top, of course. Out my window, I could see the freeway. I was staring out at the traffic going by, and I had my little radio on, naturally. 99 by Toto came on. I remember just loving the song, and every time I hear it, I am taken back to that moment. There was something so pure about that moment in time. My best friend in high school was because we found out we both liked Kiss. First thing we did after school was air jam to Kiss, and Black Sabbath, and Rush records. I'm from a time when kids still hung out and listened to records. It was a national pastime back then. I wonder if kids still do that. When I got my first car, the first thing I did was install a new stereo system. I engaged in a time-tested tradition. I wired up the stereo, which featured a radio and cassette and an EQ, and diligently installed 4 new speakers, replacing the old ones in the doors and the 2 behind the back seat. It sounded incredible. I was so proud of myself. I did it all with no help. So there I was, sitting in my room one day, and it hit me. Hey, I don't have to just sit around here bored. I have a car. I didn't have anywhere to go, nobody to see, but I had my own wheels. I just got in the car and drove. I popped in a tape. I could record an LP to tape. And I had a nice collection of tapes in a cassette case that was specifically designated for my car. I'm cruising down the boulevard, and Train Kept A-Rollin' was queued up. Imagine that! I cranked it! We live near the beach, and that's where I was headed. As I rounded a curve that rode along a coastal marsh, the song transitioned to the haunting Seasons of Wither. Time stopped as I drove along, arm hanging out the window, and the cool ocean air bathing me in delight. Whenever those songs come on, I am transported back to that moment. When I left home for the first time, it was no different. I had a little pickup truck with a half camper shell. I took a 2 or 3 week road trip, and that box of tapes was right there next to me. I was all alone, trekking down the desert highways of Borrego Springs in the Salton Sea. As the sun was setting, I was listening to the Outlaws. Stick around for some rock and roll. Again, time stood still. As an artist, I understand how profound those moments and feelings were, and only wish to capture it somehow. Back in 6th grade, on my wall of my bunk, I had pictures pinned up of my favorite band of all time. It was the beginning of summer 1979. My brother and I had been invited to spend a few weeks at a friend of the family's ranch in Crescent City, California. They had horses. It was the last time I ever flew. I was put on a yellow jet called the Top Banana, and off we went. We got there and I was greeted by my buddy Shane. I'll never forget stepping into his room. It was some kind of Kiss shrine. Wall-to-wall posters. Without a word, he went to his stereo and put on Dressed to Kill. I was speechless. I knew about Kiss from magazines and stuff, but I'd never actually heard them. Beth maybe on the radio, but that one song does not tell you what they're really all about. I was more than hooked. I had no idea music could be like that. That was the day I became a rocker. Lesson 1. Rock is cool. We'd get on our bikes and cruise around town. We made it a ritual of stopping by this one little cafe that had a jukebox. We'd order a burger and a shake and drop some quarters in it. Bad Company, Rock and Roll Fantasy was always our first pick. It took me years to realize it was not a Kiss song. I didn't even know the difference back then. He had a snare drum in his room. Peter Criss was his favorite, therefore mine as well. So I get home. I'm all kissed up and I can't wait to ask my mom to let me get some of their records. Before I could say a thing, Norm, my dad, sort of, hands me an 8-track of Paul McCartney's new album, Back to the Egg. I tried to act appreciative. He seemed excited to give it to me. And yes, I had a stereo in my room. The tape was cool, but it wasn't Kiss. That's all I wanted. My parents were not hip to them and didn't like them. Lesson 2. The folks are squares. So I resorted to begging. My mom held out for a while, but I wore her down. I still remember her driving me to the record store. I'd never been to one before. Lesson 3. The record store is where it's at. She said I could get 2. I don't remember how I decided, but I think the cover of Alive 2 just spoke to me. Besides, it was a double album and she counted it as one. Yes! Then I picked out Dynasty and we went home. I, like you, know what it is to literally wear out a record. I couldn't wait for school to get out so I could get home and put it on. I was still a latchkey kid and I had the whole house to myself for a good hour. My brother got picked up. It was my time and I chose to rock out every day. Now, something interesting started to happen. I was a Peter Criss guy, but I started to take an interest in Ace. I had a Drafter T-Square that made for a good air guitar. It was my first axe, actually. So there I'd be all alone in my room with that T-Square rocking out to the max, stereo flaming, raging. My favorite was Making Love. I understood how cool the opening riff and groove was. Still do. Oh man, the solo! Needless to say, I had their pictures all over my wall. I even had my own drawings of them. What I wouldn't do to still have those. I also had ELO on my wall. The album came with a poster. Man, those were the days. Norm didn't care for Kiss much. He got a good listen because I would not turn that down. Lesson 4. Rock and roll is rebellion. He was more old school, like ELP, Love and Spoonful, Three Dog Night kind of stuff. But I'll never forget when he once poked his head in my room and said, nodding his head, "You know, that's pretty good." It meant a lot to hear that. Maybe he wasn't so square after all. It was around that time, late every night, sitting there up on my bunk, little radio under my pillow, I discovered the Dr. Demento show on KMET. I know all about Weird Al. I lived for the top 10. So many memories. I remember exactly where I was the moment I heard Elvis died. I cried. John, Paul, George, and Ringo were household names. I cried when I heard they broke up. Hell, I knew them better than I knew what was going on in the news. The night my first son was born, I had ELO, Sweet as the Night, stuck in my head. I'll never forget being at the lake, learning to water ski with my aunt and uncle, and listening to the Beatles, Revolver and Rubber Soul blasting on the truck stereo. What a summer! My uncle's a total Dylan nut. He made me into one too. I get Dylan. If you don't, you square. Oh man. One night I was in my room, 9th grade. I heard something. It was music. But there was something else. It was coming from down the hall. I followed it. It was in the den. There was a record playing, but there was a guitar playing along. I stood, listening. I knocked. Nothing. I knocked again. Norm said, "Ben." I peeked in the door and saw him playing his guitar along with the record. He was jamming along to the blues. I never really heard that before. What kind of wonderment is this? He was standing with one leg on the amp, picking a burgundy Gibson hollow body, and he was doing what we call guitar face as he was playing. I stood mystified as he played. A little drop of sweat dangled on the tip of his nose as he seemed to be in some sort of a trance. That was the day I became a blues man, a soul man. I started sitting in every time he jammed. One night, he handed me 3 records. "Want to learn to play?" I nodded. "Start by listening to these for a few days. If you're into it, I'll give you some lessons." He handed me a B.B. King, an Albert King, and a Freddie King album. The 3 Kings. I took them as if he were handing me the Holy Grail. So I checked him out. That's all I listened to for a week. It got inside me. He heard me wearing his albums out and he asked me to return them. He gave me a few lessons on his axe. He showed me the open chords, bar chords, and the pentatonic scale. That was about it. It must have been around Christmas because I soon found an acoustic guitar and an amp under the tree, plus his old stereo system. He gave me his stereo. He got a new system. I got his old one. I got a complete high-end setup. Kenwood receiver, tape deck, EQ, and turntable. I remember him pointing out how important it was to take good care of the needle. I mean, I got a lecture about it. And to keep the records clean and how to properly handle the records. No smudges. And 2 sweet Alpine speakers. Top of the line. The components were all polished silver and had buttons galore. I remember the radio dial. It was so smooth as it turned and glided like butter, gliding the lit cursor back and forth, the stations bathed in a cool green glow. It was a system you can only find on eBay these days. I took care of it. I knew how cool it was. And now I had a guitar. Started playing. Norm must have approved because I soon found myself in the music store. He told me to pick out an electric. Wow! I browsed around. I had never been in a music store before. It was not a Guitar Center. That was down in San Diego. It was just as big. I forget what it was called, but it was down in Claremont Mesa or something. Then I saw it. The one. It looked like Ace Frehley's. It was a black Gibson Invader. I didn't know what a humbucker was back then, but it had the twin doubles. I'm sure it wasn't cheap, but he got it for me. I played it till my fingers bled. My grades began to fall. I mostly taught myself. That thing was in my hands more than my... I got good enough to play along with the records. I'm from a time when you had to listen to songs over and over and over and over and over, trying to figure them out. Thanks, Norm. I think he died about 20 years ago. I became a professional musician. He never heard my music. I ride wild horses, climb stairways to heaven, rock steady and don't fear the reaper. I take the long and windy road. I'm a free bird, stuck in the middle, don't look back, a sultan of swing, and walk through strawberry fields. I'm blinded by the light, love American Pie, flirt with disaster, drift away, wish you were here, and fly like an eagle. I love me some Tutti Frutti, I'm a hunk of burning love. I wish I didn't know now what I didn't know then, and I guess every point of refuge has its price. Most of all, I rock and roll all night and won't be fooled again. I was made for music. It's the lens in which I perceive the world. I haven't made it yet, but that's not what it's really all about for me. It's that little radio. It's the tunes. I hope people listen to my music one day. I have something to share, something to say. The music I write was influenced by all that stuff. I am among the last of my kind. And if you like the old stuff, then you'll appreciate my stuff. Modern music sucks. Everyone knows it. Today's songwriters and performers seem incapable of operating at that level. But I offer an alternative. I want it to feel like it used to feel. But I do have my own unique style, my own signature. But either way, I understand what music is and what it's for. I'm thankful that I know who Chuck Berry is and that I got to experience the Renaissance that was the Age of Sound.